I think there were several reasons. One was the community itself was changing. Times were changing, and there was a greater need for law enforcement. So the community, the regional cooperation, the ability to do more with the neighboring localities, and also the state funding. The state funding had reduced to where we were paying more than half of the total budget for law enforcement.
And then one morning at a staff meeting, I had one of my staff people say, found an interesting job for you. You got to think about this. And I asked them, well, you people don't want me anymore? Is this something you'd like me to move on? And they kiddingly said, no. I said, where's the job? They said, Roanoke County, Virginia. And I said, well, I know where the city of Roanoke is. I'd been here a couple of times, visited the museum at the Transportation Museum. Had driven through, and I liked the area, but it was nothing I knew much about.
There was a voter referendum. In Virginia, there's a voter referendum that's required, so the people voted to approve and implement a police department in Roanoke County.
By 1989, folks in Roanoke County, I believe, had decided that they wanted a police department, which would have as its head, a police chief who had to go through a vetting process, by the county to show that he was the most qualified individual for the job, not just a politician who can pull votes.
So finally, he said, well, it finally happened. He says they voted down there to take the sheriff's department and split it apart and create a county police department that'll do law enforcement work, and the sheriff will run the jail or handle prisoners or transport them or do the civil paperwork or whatever.
There was a tremendous amount of effort up front from the time that it passed, the referendum passed, and then until the implementation July the 1st of that year was a lot of work. We had to do all of the personnel changes, which the staff would be assigned to the police department, which would be assigned to the sheriff's department. The vehicles, the location, dispatch, and the whole thing. It was just a lot of work. But it was also a wonderful sense of excitement and fun because the staff, the employees, were really excited about it, and they pulled it off. They did most of that themselves.
Had an opportunity at that point to pick out our uniforms, and we did some voting on that through the employees, and picked out our colors and car design. And then it just seemed like after that it kind of rolled. It was a very quick turnaround. I think the citizens voted on it in November, and in July 1st of 1990, then we rolled out the first police car and the first officers in their uniform. So it was a busy 6 months of getting all that together. A lot of people serving on different committees, looking at the uniforms, looking at the car designs, and to start up a police department, it really went very well to get everything in place and ready to go July 1. But
one of the people that had worked tirelessly behind the scenes and was always involved was Donnie Myers. And Donnie Myers was an assistant county administrator. Ann Marine was an assistant to the county administrator, but Donnie was truly, he was in the command structure, and he was the assistant county administrator. The other assistant county administrator was John Chambliss at the time, and I remember meeting and talking with them during the process, the selection process, quite a bit.
We started going through the process. I think the first chief wanted to get the department brought up underneath the CLIA standard so that it would be nationally accredited. So that took a lot of work in the early 90s of getting all of our policies together. At that point, I sat on a policy review committee just as a regular officer, so I had a lot of input on the policies with Chief Cease, and we had monthly meetings of trying to get our policies the way he wanted them and the way that accreditation was going to take over.
The Sheriff's Office was going to centralize this. We still didn't have 911. This is prior to 911, but at least there would be a single number to call. So they wanted to hire folks who had some type of fire or rescue background. Well, I had the rescue background. It was increasing it with the EMT training. I already knew I wanted to be a policeman, and thought this would be a good way of getting started. So I applied and got hired. June 1, 1974 was my first day. It was the last week of high school. I'd take final exams in the morning and go to work at the sheriff's office that afternoon. And been here ever since in 1978, spring of 1978. By that time I was 21, and transferred out to patrol and been a street cop ever since.
After we were married in December of '88, spent a couple years down in Chesterfield. Then her father waved a few acres of land in front of my face, and that was about all it took to get me back. And it just so happens, or get me here, and it just so happens about that same time, the referendum, there was a referendum in Roanoke County to create the police department, and so I applied, and I was one of 5 new hires after the police department, Roanoke County Police Department, was created. So,
1983, I started as a dispatcher when we were the sheriff's office.
Okay.
And worked in dispatch for 5 years, and then tested to be a road officer. And so I actually started working law enforcement under the sheriff's office. And the vote to switch over to a police department was while I was on the street. So when we switched over to police department in '90, most of the law enforcement officers that had worked under the sheriff's office as law enforcement, as opposed to jail security or courtroom security, moved with the police department or stayed with the police department, and we basically switched to blue uniforms and white cars. And
then for me, I started just moving up the ranks. You know, a lot of policies were put into place, competitive policies on detectives, if you want to be promoted to detective, and work my way up through the ranks from sergeant, lieutenant, detective, and then underneath Chief Hall, I was able to obtain the assistant chief position. And then about 18 months into that position, Sheriff Paul came over and asked me to come back to the sheriff's office to be his number 2 person in charge. So for me, it's kind of been a personal roller coaster, because I was able to start with the sheriff's office, went to the police department, worked my way up through the ranks, and now I'm back at the sheriff's department, and then probably this will be the place that I end my career. So it's been a very good ride. I've enjoyed working for both departments and have friends in both. So not many people can say they've been able to lead both departments. So it's been I've been very blessed to do that.
The public was aware that we were making the change. I think the public supported it in a referendum earlier, and there was a lot of media attention to this fact, and so I would say most of the media and the citizens of Roanoke County knew that it was happening, and they accepted it very well.
Yeah, it was neat. At midnight on July 1, 1990, that was when the change took effect. I was actually working day shifts, so I was home in bed, when it happened, getting ready to go to work, for the next morning. But that night, it was neat kind of watching the video footage from some of the local news stations that did it. You had guys who were in brown uniforms who had worked the evening shift, June 30, 1990, and they were relieved by guys who were coming out in blue uniforms to take the midnight shift. Brown cars were replaced by guys in white cars. It was neat. It was very neat. And of course, the next morning when I came to work, I was in a blue uniform instead of the brown one that I'd worn the day before.
for me, I thought the cool thing about all of that was just that we were part of history for Roanoke County. So to me, that was the neat part. On the very first night in 1990 when we switched over, we all drove our brown cars up there and carried uniforms or came in uniforms or switched over our uniforms when we got up there. And the midnight shift that normally started at 11 started at midnight that night. And they kept the 3 to 11 shift over a little bit longer. And so we started out at midnight handling calls in new blue uniforms and new white cars. So it was, and I worked that night. It was very cool. But it was exciting because we were part of something brand new and, you know, part of a historic moment for Roanoke County. So we all thought that was a neat thing.
starting that next day, it was so unfamiliar. Everything was different. Uniforms different. Your gear's all new, and you're trying to get kind of seated and everything. But it was really a good process. I know that we got a lot of support from the citizens that first day we were out, and of course everybody when we're out there doing our work, they're like, well, what happened? You were brown yesterday, now we're blue. So that first month or so, you're always explaining what happened and why we changed, and so it was interesting. It was very interesting.
I was in investigations at the time, and I remember going to the department at midnight to make sure everything went all right in my division. And we changed uniforms at midnight, and things went on very normal. I remember we got one call from a local establishment that had dancing and served alcohol shortly after midnight, and our uniformed officers responded there, and they said, no, we want the sheriff's department, and they just hadn't realized that we had converted to a police department. We had about 99 members, sworn officers, when I started as chief, and I think we grew to about 140 in the 14 years that I was there as chief.
We've expanded. We certainly expanded our services that we're providing folks. The county got bigger, and the police department got bigger with it.
We have a total of 156 employees. 140 of those are sworn police officers, and that includes me all the way down the rank structure, and we have 16 civilian staff. If you look kind of nationally at the size of police departments, we're above the 90th percentile in terms of size. Many people don't realize that the vast majority of police departments in the United States have 20 or less police officers. So,
Elementary school that had been built back in the 1930s. It had been built on ever since and expanded, but that building had been there for a long time, and we had, I think we'd been in it since 1986 maybe, when we were still sheriff's office. It was an old building. I mean, it served its purpose, but it was an old building. It was not wired for the technology that we had. Even by 1990, we were already outgrowing the thing. Certainly by 2006, when we finally moved out. So we were happy when they finally decided to build the current facility that we have here, the Public Safety Building on Cove Road. It was moving into this facility and actually have things work was nice.
I mean, we moved from the basement of the original courthouse in Salem while I was there. That was our first move, and we thought that was a huge move, into Southview. And then when we moved from Southview to the brand new building in Cove Road, where we were starting from scratch and building a brand new building with trying to keep in mind the technologies and the radio equipment and kind of planning for the future so that was a long-term situation, was just a huge job. It was great. It was probably a demonstration of Roanoke County departments working together at its best.
It was one of those things that we did together. If the community needed it, if there was something that the staff needed, we did that together with the board and with the staff and with the department itself. That was a we effort.
Well, I think in 1990, the establishment of the police department, we had quite a few years to work on our training. We really emphasized training after I became chief. We built a driver training center. We built a firearms range and various other training facilities. And shortly after that, we established our own training academy. And I think that the training to make better police officers was one of the things that I felt like was important during my time there.
The training and the building, I think, are the things that stand out for me.
The sidearms, rather, that we were using were wheel guns. I mean, they were revolvers. That's how far back I go. And police departments at that time were just starting to make the transition to semi-automatic handguns. And so that's one thing I distinctly remember, and they did. Roanoke County had just gotten 6-hour 226 9mm.
One of the big steps that we took as a law enforcement agency was the accreditation process. And you'll hear folks refer to CALEA, which is the accrediting agency that does this. And essentially what they do, it doesn't give any more people or any more money or anything like that, but what it does is it makes you look carefully at your policies and practices and make sure that your policies and practices are what they should be.
That sets standards for officers under which they must conduct themselves, and hence the rules and regulations of the department were written in such a manner that we would qualify for national accreditation. And they are very adamant about how we will work with the public and how the public will be treated. And we didn't hire people that we didn't think would fit that mold.
The first night of work in 1990, July 1st, when we switched to police department, that was just an exciting night, and I was all about being part of something new and a historic moment. So I thought that was great. I was excited and in my glory, and had a great night, and it was fun, and it was a cool thing to be part of.
Really good people. That's one thing I do miss even now. Some of the people, or a lot of the people I worked with, and formed real close friendships with.
I guess one of the sad moments I had is I was on duty the night that we had to work the realtor that was killed over off Buck Mountain Road. That was a trying time as just a regular uniformed police officer, being the first one there and starting that investigation.
I think that probably one of the most memorable moments was when we found the little girl, the little 12-year-old girl whose mother had been killed, and she had been taken to California. We had worked on that for numerous days, and we were very apprehensive about what could happen and what might happen. And then when we found her alive and safe, that was a very memorable moment.
I would like for them to continue as they are. I always worried about them when there was bad weather or storms or something that was really difficult going on. I want them to be safe. I want them to have the best equipment, the best training that they can get. I think that today they have an outstanding police chief too.
Roanoke County is a great place to work. The police department it's a great department. They've got a lot of good people there.
Well, I would like to wish the department a happy 25th birthday, and certainly they have earned these 25 years and the celebration that goes along with it, and I look forward to many, many more years.
The county police department is just on the top of its game as far as being professional, and I think the citizens of Roanoke County would also agree with that.
I really enjoy having the perspective of having been here prior to the inception of the police department, and being able to, having had the privilege to be with the agency as long as I have, and watching all the expansions and improvements and changes that have occurred. It amazes me, even to this day, the quality of the people that we have here. I think we have one of the best educated, most professional departments you're going to find anywhere in the Commonwealth. And that is, that's not by accident. We have always endeavored to promote that type of professionalism. And I think pretty much we've been successful at doing it. It's 41 years here, and I wouldn't trade a second of it.
The open house that they have, the Citizens Police Academy, all of those things, that community policing, that involving approach to the public safety is what's really paid great dividends. They're the best in the state. They're just outstanding.